Hey guys, last week we talked about 3 different ways to find slope, and you need to make sure that you have your notes in front of you. And we're going to review really quick all the different things that we talked about last week to help us refresh our memory. So we talked about the 4 different types of slope, and that we need to know each by their picture. So this first one here that we have, we talked about this being a positive slope. Okay, this was positive because it rises as it moves from left to right. This one is negative because it falls from left to right. This one is horizontal, which means it has 0 slope. And then the special thing that we learned was vertical lines have an undefined slope. Okay, vertical lines have an undefined slope. Next, we talked about all of the different ways that we could use a graph to find the slope. And to refresh your memory, we count from one point to the next, and we say rise. So this is rise 1, rise 2, run 1. So remember, rise over run. Okay, this one was 2 over 1. Okay, and the same for this. I'm not going to go over each of these because we've already done these, but just remember, slope is rise over run. If the line falls like this one does, it has a negative slope, then the slope is going to be negative. So that means for this one, we fall 1, 2, 3, and run 1. So that means this is going to be negative 3 over 1. Alright, moving on. All these different ones we talked about last week. Now, you guys were really, really good at this last week in finding the slope when you're given 2 points. This was the second way that we talked about finding slope. So when you're given a set of points, we talked about circle your y's, box your x's, draw the fraction bar with your minus signs, and then we're going to plug in those points. So this is going to be 4 minus 2. And then on the bottom, we have negative 1 minus 5. And remember, we can always check to see if we're right. If we can recreate our points right here, if we circle them up and down and we can recreate our points, then we've plugged them in the right way. And then we just do the math and solve. But you guys were really good at that, so we're not going to go over that anymore either. And we went through all of these different problems to figure out how to do the slope. And this is where we left off. So we're now talking about slope being given an equation. And this says, when given an equation such as y equals mx plus b, the slope is the coefficient to x, which is m. So the equation is written right here. I'm going to write it again. Y equals mx plus b. So if I had an equation that looked like this, y equals negative 3x plus 2, then I would say, if I'm going to identify my slope, I would say m equals negative 3. It's always going to be this value right here. And it might be a whole number and it might be a fraction. So you might see one that's written like this. Y equals negative 1/2 x minus 4. Well, then for this one, the slope is going to be, hopefully you all said negative 1/2, because it's the value right next to that x, always. So this would mean we fall 1 and we run 2. Okay, if we were going to use this to plot a graph, fall 1 and run 2. Now let's get to the hard stuff. So I showed you how to identify each one when we're using m. And this is where you need to pick up on your notes. This is where we left off. It says, what is the slope of the given equation or function? Remember, we can call an equation a function. So if we're looking at this first equation right here, what would be the slope of this? Remember, slope is y equals mx plus b, and m is the slope. So the slope of this equation would be 4. And if I drag this over here, you see that it becomes 4. If I look at the next one underneath here, then the slope would be 1/3. Okay? Alright, so back again. The slope is always that value that's right next to the x. And if I slide it over here, we see that the m value is 1/3. And I'll show you how to find the slope and use this to plot points on a graph, and we'll talk about that on Tuesday. So look at some more examples. For this one, I don't see a coefficient next to x, it just says negative x. What happens if I have a negative x? If I have a negative x, then that means my coefficient is not seen. I've told you guys before, what if we had, let's see, negative x, or we just had, let's erase that. I'm trying to think of a better example. Instead of negative x, if we just had x equals 4, how many x's do I have? I have 1x. So what do we know about that then, if we to take that and apply it to this new function that we're looking at here? We've got to worry about that minus sign, the negative sign, but what do we have here? This is an equation that has a negative coefficient, so we're going to pretend that there's a little 1 in there, so it's negative 1x. So now what would be your slope? Hopefully you all just said negative 1. So if we don't see anything in front of the x other than that negative sign, it's going to be a negative 1. If it was just x, if we had y equals x plus 7, then the slope for this one would just be 1. Okay? Scroll down here and look at the next one. This is the one I want you to pay very, very, very close attention to. This entire piece, does it look like y equals mx plus b? Not at all. It looks like this. ax plus b y equals c. This is a special way we write equations, and it's called standard form. I want you to write that down. Standard form. So that means this one that we've been using all along, if we haven't already talked about it, is slope intercept form. Okay, so y equals mx plus b. It's slope intercept form. ax plus by equals c is standard form. So how are we going to work with this? Well, we need to take any equation that we find in standard form and put it into slope-intercept form. So we're going to solve this equation for y. Just like we would solve an equation for x and figure out what one variable equals in terms of it being one number, we're going to solve this one for one variable, but we're going to have a bunch of other stuff instead. So I'm going to show you one time, and then I want you to pay close attention, and we'll do some more together. So if I need to get this y by itself, then I need to move this 4x first. And it's positive, so in order to move it, I'm going to subtract 4x from both sides of this side. So now I'm going to be left with 2y, because these are gone. We know that from solving equations. Equals, now I'm going to put the x first, because if you notice up here, that x comes first in that slope-intercept form. So this is going to be negative 4x plus 16. And I said plus because here the 16 is positive. We just can't see that yet. It's written to be positive. So we're almost done. It almost looks like y equals mx plus b, but it's not there yet. So the last thing that we have to do, how do I get y by itself? If I was solving the equation 2y equals 10, then I would divide both sides by 2 to get y equals 5, right? So in the same token, on this side, I'm going to divide this piece by 2, and I'm going to divide this piece by 2, and I'm going to divide this piece by 2. So every single piece I'm going to divide by whatever's next to that y, so that I can get that y by itself. So now I have negative 4 divided by 2. We're going to leave that x What is negative divided by positive? Well, that's a negative. Now divide the numbers. 4 divided by 2 is 2. I'm going to keep my plus sign. 16 divided by 2 is 8. Now this right here is written in that slope-intercept form that we've just talked about, the y equals mx plus b. So after all of that, our slope is going to be what? Well, it should be negative 2. It's this value right here next to our x. And we proved that it was negative 2. So I'm going to take our equation, slide it over, and look at all of that. Did my math look exactly like their math? Almost. They don't show how we move the negative 4x to each side, do they? Okay. So, but we did find out that the slope is negative 2. Alright, now we have another one. Flip over to the next slide on your page. So remember, we want this to look like y equals mx plus b. How do we solve this for y? Well, the first thing we're going to do is subtract 2x from both sides. Okay. So that means this is gone, and I need to leave this as y equals, remember I'm going to put the x value first, negative 2x plus 8. There's no minus sign here to show that the 8 is negative, so we're going to say that it's plus. And if I slide my equation over, the slope is going to be negative 2. It's that value right next to the x. So when I slide this, it should be negative 2, which it is. This one's already in slope-intercept form. Almost, isn't it? It looks like one piece comes before the other. That doesn't really matter all the time, but if it helps you to feel comfortable, we can just switch these two around and say that this is 5x plus negative 2, or we can say 5x minus 2, because adding a negative is the same thing as subtracting a positive. But does that change our value of our slope? It shouldn't. The slope is always next to the x value, so that x value is 5. So we're going to take this and slide it over, and look there. M equals 5. So let's recap. How do you find slope if you are given a graph? And we talked about this. And I'll let Miss Rhodes pause the video through each of these equations, or each of these questions, I'm sorry, and you guys can discuss each one of those. So how do you find slope if you're given a graph? How do you find slope if you're given an equation? What might you have to do to the equation first? How do you find slope if given 2 points from the line? What do the little 2's and 1's mean in the slope formula? I hope that this has been helpful for you. Miss Mummert has a worksheet for you where you're going to be solving equations for y and determining what the slope is. I want you to do your very, very best. I think you can handle it really well. And make sure every night this week you need to study for your CUA. We have a CUA on Friday. Y'all have a great day.